Welcome back. Some big news coming out of the House Intelligence Committee hearing on Russia. FBI Director James Comey revealed that the agency is investigating whether there was any coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia and whether Russia tried to influence the election. Comey also said there's absolutely no proof to support President Trump's claim that he was wiretapped by President Obama. Let's get into this with our panel. We're joined tonight by Dominic, political journalist and author. And on the other side of the table is Jeanne Zaino. Jeanne is a professor of political science at Iona College. Sorry about the Gales this weekend. She's also a senior advisor at the consulting firm Applied Technomics. Welcome to you both. Joe Scarborough went on Twitter after the hearings today, and he said, today is the worst day of Trump's presidency, which beat out Friday as being the previous worst day of the presidency. Do you agree?
It was a very bad day for the Trump administration today because it poked holes in the credibility of the administration on almost every angle. And the problem for the Trump administration is not even so much what happened today, but the fact that it's going to make it increasingly difficult for him to move his agenda through Congress. And so I do agree that if you had to look at the last, 60 days or whatever it has been, this was probably one of the worst. And unfortunately, it was an error he brought on himself by making these claims. I mean, he did this to himself, and that's the worst part of it.
You didn't need Joe Scarborough to say this.
Well, it's better than me saying it. It's better than me quoting myself.
But the point I'm trying to make is that to anyone that follows politics, it's been very clear that this path has been going down a road that's not good for this new president. The president has got serious problems. The plus side is that the institution of the presidency protects him, insulates him to a degree. The bad side is you've got wild cards like Roger Stone out there, Paul Manafort, and the FBI investigating. That's not a good scenario, Mr. Whitman.
You know, the amazing thing about this hearing today is it really felt like three hearings in one, because there were three topics that kept bubbling up to the top. The claims that Obama wiretapped Trump Tower, the Russian interference in the election and whether they were working in collusion with the Trump campaign, and Republicans kept wanting to focus on the leaks. We'll get into all three of these, time permitting, but we'll start with the wiretapping of Trump Tower. And you have the FBI now saying that there is no evidence that they have that there was any wiretapping of President Trump at Trump Tower by President Obama. Is this an emperor wears no clothes kind of day, particularly for those independent voters who might not love Donald Trump but voted for him anyway, or even for Trump supporters, Jeanne?
I'm not so certain that it's going to change many minds what's happening here today on the ground. I'm not so certain that his supporters are going to leave him, or people who, were, as you mentioned, these independents who are not incredibly supportive are going to leave him over this. But what I do think is in the longer term, again, this is where the damage is done. So I don't think today, in the next 3 days, we're going to see polls that his support is dropping dramatically. But I think long term, if he has to make a big decision about something like North Korea, say, that's where I think the question of legitimacy really comes into play. And the fact is, as you mentioned, it was 3 hearings in one big chunk of which never had to be raised, which was the wiretapping of Trump Tower. If you had handled this correctly, he very early on would have said, we want to investigate fully and completely any Russian involvement in this election and get to the bottom of it. That's it. Let Congress and the FBI do its business, and let's move forward with the agenda of the American public. He didn't do that, and hence this big mess.
Couldn't help but think, as I was listening to this hearing today, Dominic, that if you were talking about any of the 44 previous presidents who made criminal allegations about a predecessor with no information, suggesting election fraud in addition to civil rights violations by illegal, we'd be talking about resignation or impeachment today.
Well, we would, Andrew, but in this case, we're dealing with someone that loves to fight the establishment, loves to fight the media. The more the media comes at him, the more he's going to dig in. Not a good day for the president, but I agree with the professor's point. Not much is going to change, because here's the point he's going to make to his base. I'll try and explain this a little bit. His spokesman came out the other day. Here's why they're saying nothing changed. His claim, the president's claim, because he has nothing else to go on, is going to be, we never alleged that U.S. intelligence did the wiretapping ordered by Obama. If you notice what Sean Spicer said the other day, he said British officials did it. So he's going to, until the last day, he's going to hold on to that line. He's going to fight. He's going to fight. But as I said, after the first 2 weeks of his administration, And I know you may say, Dominic, hold on. We might be looking at impeachment. I don't know when. I don't know if that'll actually happen. But he's playing a very dangerous game, and right now he's losing that game.
Let's move on to the Russian interference in the election. And first, before I can even get to the details that we came through, there's one piece of news that Comey gave today that stuck in my craw, and I'm sure every Democrat in the country is screaming at it. It is that the investigation into Russian interference in the election and possible collusion with the Trump campaign began in July of 2016. July of 2016 is an interesting month because that's the month that Comey went public with Hillary's emails for the first time and said, well, there just wasn't enough to prosecute, but this is the information that we have. And that really sort of metastasized the Hillary email troubles. Jeanne, fair to ask why Comey thought that the Russian investigation and Russian interference in the election didn't rise to the level that the public needed to know, but Hillary's emails did?
Absolutely fair to ask, and I don't think he has a good answer to that question because he never should have gone public with the Clinton investigation. And then to pull back on it, and then later as they came into the Anthony Weiner issue, that became a public issue as well. So, and then of course it was no surprise, right, in the end when Donald Trump decided, hey, I'm going to keep James Comey on as FBI director, which didn't have to happen. And now that's coming back to roost for Donald Trump. So, James Comey has a lot of explaining to do. And if you remember back when that first occurred and that issue first came to light, many Republicans who had been in his position or in the Justice Department said this should never have been brought public. And if it was, then why wasn't everything else, including the investigation into the Russian connection? And there was never a good answer for that.
It's now, Dominic, beyond dispute after listening to Comey today that Donald Trump was elected president of the United States with the assistance of Russian involvement. He might not have sought it, he might not have wanted it, he might not have known it even happened, but he was elected president thanks to an assist, at least in some measure,
even
from
though
Russia.
Publicly he went on the campaign trail and urged those to continue doing electronic or interference in terms of looking for dirt on Hillary Clinton, even though he publicly did that during the campaign.
It seems like the White House, ever since January 20th, has been doing whatever it can to stamp down any impression that this is somehow not a legitimate presidency. Feels a little less legitimate today than it did yesterday, doesn't it?
I'm going to be very real right now. Remember early on I predicted Mr. Trump's success, right? I'm going to say this now, right now. He is so close to the line. He's been used to, as a businessman perhaps, his way or the highway every single time. And it worked, whether either through legal counsel or whatever. But everything's coming, it's closing in on him now. And the institution of the presidency will protect him to a degree. But we are going into uncharted territory.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, and I think what's telling for me today is the fact that this was not a very partisan hearing, if you will. Sure, the Republicans tried to go in one direction and the Democrats tried to underscore certain things, but you didn't hear any defense amongst Republicans, or very little, of the president's position. And that is telling because, to Dominic's point, if he faces something like an impeachment down the road, you need support of your own party to survive that. He's unlikely to get that if you're listening to what they've been saying.
Meanwhile, all the Republicans, or most of the Republicans, were focused on the leaking of the information. The leaking that, by the way, led us to Mike Flynn and led us to Jeff Sessions, and knowing that they were in communications with the Russians during the campaign. Does this holding on for dear life to the leaking part of this investigation, I mean, it struck me as being somewhat tone deaf by Republicans today. I don't know if you got the same impression or if you think other people who are watching will come away with that same takeaway.
I do think liberals and Democrats will come away with that takeaway. I'm not sure Republicans will. And, in defense of the Republicans, I do think the leaks matter. Now, yes, they did give us Flynn, they gave us Sessions, and that information is important. But also, let's not forget, we shouldn't have these types of leaks occurring, and that is a concern to everybody when it comes to national security. So Republicans will hang on to it. I don't think that's as much of a problem.
It's a fair point, except that leaking from a White House is something that happens in every administration.
Not to this extent.
That's true, but Russian involvement in the election doesn't really happen in every administration. Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, the other big news of the day, the confirmation hearings for Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch kicking off today. Did he get off easy, or did Democrats tee off on President Trump's pick?